On a Thursday morning in June 1972, a decade before the execution of Charlie Brooks, hundreds of death row prisoners across the country laughed and whooped and rattled their cell doors. They had spent months and even years waiting for the day they'd be led to an electric chair or gas chamber or firing squad or noose. But now the shocking news was making its way down the runs. The Supreme Court had ruled that every death penalty law in the country was unconstitutional. All of their death sentences had been thrown out. In Florida, a prisoner wrapped a guard in a bear hug. In Tennessee, one placed his hands on his hips and scowled as a news photographer snapped his picture next to the electric chair, as though he had conquered this dusty pile of wood and leather. In Texas, a wave of applause rang through the Ellis unit in Huntsville, and when Elmer Branch received the evening issue of the Houston Chronicle, he stretched his arms out of his cell to show it to his neighbors. The next morning, Branch himself would be above the fold in newspapers across the country, pictured sitting on his neatly made prison cot and gazing through the cell bars. Many of the papers noted his crime, the rape of an elderly white woman. "If I ever get out, I'll try to find a job," Branch, who was black, told a reporter. "I would go somewhere where I could make something of myself." The Supreme Court's decision in Furman v. Georgia, which had been joined by Branch's own case, Branch v. Texas, appeared to represent the end of the death penalty in the United States. It was the culmination of a long decline. Since the 1800s, a number of states had been removing capital punishment from their laws or limiting it to rare crimes. In 1959, there had been 124 murders in Harris County, Texas, which encompassed Houston, but only 3 people sentenced to death, and a candidate for district attorney there openly questioned capital punishment. By 1963, the year a Texan became president, polls showed less than half the country favored the practice, and Lyndon Johnson appointed an attorney general who openly opposed it. The news of American military atrocities in Vietnam, along with the discovery of German death camps a generation before, gave new power to the argument that governments should be restrained in their authority over life and death. Many European countries were abandoning executions as well. Amid this broad cultural and political shift, there were people nudging history along. In Manhattan, lawyers with the Legal Defense Fund of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People spent the 1960s mounting an assault on capital punishment, believing the institution to be deeply linked to the history of racial injustice. Their leader in this effort was Anthony Amsterdam. A tall and lanky law professor, his eyes sunken but demanding, Amsterdam was famous for working 24-hour days and appearing to survive on thin cigars, coffee, and diet soda. He was the kind of lawyer who could dictate a brief from memory over the phone and argue in court without notes. In one oft-repeated story, he cited an obscure old case by volume and page number. The judge looked it up and couldn't find it on the page, and Amsterdam brazenly suggested the judge's copy of the volume must be bound incorrectly. He turned out to be right. In 1963, Amsterdam and the LDF received a signal that they were uniquely prepared to interpret. In response to an appeal from an Alabama prisoner, 3 Supreme Court justices signed a brief statement saying the court should decide whether it violated the Constitution to execute someone for the crime of rape. The justices rejected the vast majority of appeals without writing publicly, so this statement was a quiet bombshell. It implied that if the LDF lawyers challenged the death penalty in the courts, they might succeed.